At the outset, I want to pay my respect to the Honorable Chief Minister and his Council of Ministers and the Honorable members of the Legislative Assembly. And I also want to pay my respect to P.K. Tungunji, who is the first Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh. And I'm sure he has seen what we have gone through in our struggle for freedom and in our status as refugees in India. I also want to thank R.K. Krimeji, who is the co-convener of the core group for Tibetan cause, and all the members of the core group who have come from different parts of India to attend this conference or seminar on environment and security. I also want to thank Tarakji, President of Himalayan Suraksha Manch, for organizing this conference, of course, with the support and benevolence of the Honorable Chief Minister. I am also to understand that former MLAs, former ministers, and members of the all Arunachal Pradesh indigenous tribes representatives are here, and also members of all community-based organizations here at this conference. And I think this is one of the very unique occasions where every leadership of Arunachal Pradesh have come from different parts of Arunachal to attend this seminar. Of course, we will speak more about environment and security in the afternoon session, but this morning session, I thought maybe I'll go through a little bit on the overall overview of the Tibetan situation. We have lived in India for now almost 66 years. None of our people thought that we would have to live in India for that long, because even the 13th Dalai Lama came into exile in India in 1910, and in 2 years he returned back to Tibet, because we managed to push all the Tibetans out of Tibet in 1912. And the present generation also thought that we will go back to Tibet very soon when we came into exile, first in 1959, as R.K. Krimeji mentioned. But It has been 66 years. And in my case, I was also born in India, so I very much, wherever I go, I always say that I'm very much an Indian, even though I look a little different. Very much an Indian because if we go through the history of Tibet, we will understand that the relation between India and Tibet is very, very old. In fact, we can imagine since the time civilization started on either side of the Himalayas, we have always lived together. How much interaction there has been between the Tibetans or Indians depends on the relations that we enjoyed during that time. But not many Indians know that there is a version in the Tibetan history that the first king of Tibet came from India. This is one version. That is about 2,200 years ago, more than 2,200 years ago, the first king, the shouldered enthroned king, came from India. And then the Tibetan script came from India. The Tibetan linguistic script came from Devanagari script or Brahmi or Gupta script. Because even now, Tibetan alphabet, if you recite Kaka Khanga, Cha Cha Chanya, Tata Thana, it's very similar to Hindi. You have Kaka Ka Ga Nga, Cha 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 Janya. And the Tibetan vowels are only four, E, U, A, O. Whereas in Hindi, you have so many vowels, A, E, E, U, A, O, Aha. So whatever I learned during my grade 8, I still remember pretty a small part of that. So the Tibetan language that came from India, the Tibetan script that came from India, today Tibetan language is one among the 15 most oldest languages in this world with more than 1,000 years of history. And then Buddhism came to Tibet from India, from the Nalanda school of Buddhism in 8th century. And we Tibetans transliterated every available Sanskrit and Pali Buddhist text into Tibetan between 8th century to 13th century, and we must have had the biggest transliteration in the house at that time. So we have translated every teachings of the Buddha and the commentaries by experts into Tibetan, and today Tibet is the only country, or Tibetan is the only language that has all the translated version of Buddha's teachings. And we are very proud to be repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom, Buddhism, that is based on peace and nonviolence. Then Tibet disintegrated for about 400 years from 9th to 13th century. Even in the 13th century, at the end of our disintegrated years, I heard 3 years back, I was in Kolkata and I was looking at Google to find out about a temple that was built by a previous Panchen Lama in Calcutta. But I came across another historical fact that when at the beginning of 13th century on 1206, when Tibet disintegrated, was in a very weak state, India was ruled by the Khiljis. And in 1206, Bakhtiyar Khilji sent 10,000 army into Tibet through Kuch Bihar, and only 100 returned back. I don't mean to say that all the Bakhtiyar Khilji's army were killed by the Tibetans, but even when we were disintegrated, our borders were very well protected. Then 13th century, Mongols became a big empire in Central Asia, and we built relations with the Mongols around 1247. And then we became teachers, Buddhist teachers to the Mongol kings. And then Kublai Khan invaded China. So we established relations with the Mongols much before Mongolians invaded China. So Kublai Khan invaded China in 1271 and established the Yuan dynasty. So for Chinese historians, the Yuan is only that period when the Mongols ruled China from 1271 to 1368. And comparatively, during that period, Tibet was ruled by the Sakyapas with the patronage of the Mongolians. Then the Mongols were overthrown by the Ming Chinese, and they ruled China from 1368 to 1644. So during those periods, there were three dynasties in Tibet: Phamodruba dynasty for about 100 years, Rinpoche dynasty for about 100 years, and Devachangpa for about 100 years, till 1642, when the fifth Dalai Lama took over the temporal and spiritual leadership of Tibet, 2 years before the Qings or the Manchus overthrew the Mings in China and ruled China from 1644 to 1911. So Tibet from 1642 was ruled by the successive Dalai Lamas from the 5th to the present. This is just to give you a very brief overview of Tibetan history, because we always live under the illusion that people know about us, but unfortunately not many people understand Tibet or the historical status of Tibet as an independent state. So of course, there was the 1904 Young Husband expedition into Tibet, where the Britishers came up to Lhasa. Then the 13th Dalai Lama had to flee to Mongolia and then to China. And then he returned back in Tibet in 1909, December. And 3 months after that, His Holiness had to come into exile. So as I mentioned before, within 2 years, we returned back because we kicked out all the Chinese from Tibet, not from the Tibetan frontier, but through India. So that's why you still find some Chinese in Kolkata and other places. But not all of them were those removed from Tibet, but some of them had come as traders. So there is a lot of historical background behind that. After His Holiness returned back to Tibet, then His Holiness engaged in international diplomacy, because Tibet remained isolated for so long, and His Holiness has seen Mongolia, His Holiness the 13th Dalai Lama had seen China, met with foreign diplomats, and then His Holiness came to India and saw British India at that time. So he had, because of those exposures, he understood that international treaties are very important, and then for the first time we had a treaty with the Mongolians declaring each other to be independent in 1913, and then you have the Shimla Agreement of 1914, where the McMahon Line, which demarcates the boundary between Tibet and India, was marked, and it's still being held as the boundary here in Arunachal Pradesh. And this agreement, or the was 1914 agreement, was signed between independent Tibet and British India. The Chinese plenipotentiary was there in the beginning, but did not come for the final ratification of the treaty. So now maybe I'll give you a little overview about what Krimiji had already said about the CTA. So since we came into exile in 1959, His Holiness came through Arunachal Pradesh. Of course, we have our relation with Arunachal Pradesh through the 6th Dalai Lama. It's not necessary that Dalai Lamas are all born inside Tibet. 6th Dalai Lama was born in India, in Arunachal Pradesh, and the 4th Dalai Lama was born in Mongolia. So you have precedents of the Dalai Lamas not necessarily having to be born in Tibet, but also in other countries. After coming into exile, we faced through a lot of difficulties. His Holiness was here in Tezpur. He gave the first press conference here in Tezpur. Then he was moved to Mussoorie. Then the Indian government wanted him to move to Dharamsala. So we were in Mussoorie for 1 year. And then we established the Central Tibetan Administration of the Tibetan government in exile in Dharamsala with the help of the Indian government. So today, Tibetans in India are spread across 10 Indian states and 2 union territories. The number as of today is about 70,000 Tibetans in India, about 8,300 Tibetans in Nepal, and now many Tibetans are moving out to other countries, particularly in the West, in North America, Europe, and in Australasia area. So we are spread across 37 locations in India in compact or scattered communities. And in Dharamsala, of course, when His Holiness first established democracy, not even 1 year after coming into exile in 1960, our people had no idea what democracy meant, what organs or institutions do you need for democracy. So the first few years, people spent time learning about democracy. And first 30 years was difficult, but under the leadership of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and his visionary thinking, we followed him. Our predecessors followed him, and we continue to follow and abide by His Holiness' visions. So because of His Holiness' democratization, even an ordinary person like me today could become the Sikyong responsible for the Tibetan cause. And today in Dharamsala, we have our Supreme Justice Commission, which functions more like an arbitration rather than a court, but we do follow all due processes of law, even though we don't handle criminal cases because we have to conform to Indian laws. So we handle only civil and administrative cases within the Central Tibetan administration. And then we also have a parliament of 45 members. In fact, unlike many other democracies in this world, we don't have political parties. So there's no ruling party or opposition party. And if you have to stand for my position, you have to, if you have the resources, both human and financial, then you have to campaign in more than 27 different countries around the world. Then the Tibetan parliamentarians are also elected in one day all over the world. 45 members. We don't have territorial constituencies or political parties because I think Acharya Vinoba Bhave ji had written about partyless democracy, but we are the only practicing partyless democracy in this world today. And then we have the executive, which is the head of the executive. Sikyong is elected directly by the Tibetans all over the world in one day. And then the Sikyong nominates 7 ministers, up to 7 ministers. So we have a department for religion and culture with about 292 monasteries and nunneries registered under it. But today, if you look at the numbers of monks and nuns in the monasteries, in all these 292 monasteries, you will find that 69% of the monks and nuns are from the Himalayan region, from Ladakh to Lahore Spiti to Sikkim to Arunachal Pradesh. So only 29% are Tibetans and 2% are from Mongolia and other non-Himalayan and non-Tibetan population. So you can see how much change has taken place since we came into exile. When we first started the monasteries, it was only Tibetan. But since all the Himalayan region enjoy the same cultural roots as Tibetans, so we have now integrated our community. And eventually, all these big monasteries in India that we run will be run by Himalayan people. And His Holiness has always said that the future of Buddhism lies in the hands of Himalayan people. And that is the responsibility that the Himalayans are also taking up. And then we also have a religion department for home that looks after the rehabilitation of all these 37 communities in India and Nepal and Bhutan. Then we have department for security responsible for His Holiness security, but most of that is handled by the central government and the state government of India. But when there are large teachings, then we provide additional security. Then we run about 61 schools in India and Nepal, about 8 schools in Nepal and the rest in India. And in these schools also, about 15,000 students study. And out of these 15,000, about 5,000, 6,000 students are from the Himalayan region. So even though we are refugees, we try to give back to the people of India as much as possible. Then we also have a department for health that handles both allopathic and Tibetan medicine. We have a department for information and international relations. We have office in Tokyo, Taipei, Canberra, New Delhi, Kathmandu, Moscow, Johannesburg in South Africa, London, Brussels, Geneva, Sao Paulo, and Washington, D.C. All these 12 offices, through these offices, we reach out to the international community. So this is just to give you a brief overview of how we function as an exiled government. And in my responsibility as Sikyong, of course, one responsibility is to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict. We are trying our best to reach out to the Chinese government. Of course, we have adopted this policy called the Middle Way policy, as espoused by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. From 1959 to 1973, we have always asked for and fought for independence. But looking at the reality of the global politics and what was happening in Tibet, when you say 1973, you can imagine 10 years of cultural revolution that was going on in the whole of China and more so in Tibet, where everything old was being destroyed. So there was this question of whether Tibet would exist or not, whether we would be able to defend or preserve our identity or not. So those were the major questions that that His Holiness considered, and looking at the overall global situation, he decided to go for this middle way, seeking genuine autonomy for Tibet. Because even now in Tibet, it's called Tibet Autonomous Region, Tibet Autonomous Prefecture, County, and all those, but there's no real autonomy. It's only in name. So we are asking for genuine autonomy, not only in name, but also in practice, because His Holiness appreciates the concept of European Union. Even now, His Holiness says that if it had not been for the concept of European Union, Europeans would still be fighting with each other. So if that is the case, then why can't why can't the same approach be applied to Tibet as well, where whether we like it or not, we don't have a Hanuman to lift Tibet out of that place and put it somewhere else. So whenever we get to go back, we have to go back to Tibet, and we have to live with peace, in peace with our neighbors, whether it's China or India or Bhutan or Nepal or any other country, because we have lived together as people for millennia in peace with each other. So why can't we live in peace in future also? Because living together as neighbors but fighting every time with each other does not help anybody. So with that thinking, His Holiness adopted the middle way. And now when I travel around internationally, so far we have covered more than 27 different countries, and we will still be traveling more and cover more countries to reach out and make them aware of what is happening inside Tibet and what China is doing to the whole world. Here in Himalayas, we are talking about Himalayas as a point of security for Indians. And for South Indians, our friends coming from Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, Pondicherry, Puducherry, for them, Himalaya is not a matter for them because they are too far away from Himalaya. But today, including Himalayas, maritime security has become very, very important for India because of China's Belt and Road initiatives and creating all these dead economies around the world. Much of the sea trade goes through the Malacca Straits. So China is trying to control the Malacca Straits and then also give so much loan to other countries that countries are not able to pay back the loans. So they have taken over part of Sihanoukville port in Cambodia because Cambodia is almost 40% in debt with China. And they have taken over Coco Islands in Burma and another small place in Burma from where they can watch the whole of Bay of Bengal, which is a huge security threat to India. Now it's not only the Himalayas. Now China also built the airport and the seaport in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka went bankrupt because the promised business was not there through the maritime Silk Road, and Sri Lanka had to give away Hambantota port, not just the port, but it's about 6 kilometers beyond the port that the Chinese have occupied. And it's a huge security threat to India. And you also know about what happened to Maldives when President Muiji came up and he became very close to the Chinese. And today, Maldives is just coming back to India. So hopefully they will rebalance their strategic thinking and come back to India because that is where their future belongs. And just yesterday also, there was this news that the first international flight from Gwadar port was launched from yesterday. And Gwadar is now taken over by Chinese. And Gwadar is a very strategic location in Baluchistan because it oversees the whole of Arabian Sea. So India is surrounded by China. We're not talking about Pakistan, Nepal or Bangladesh, or what China is trying to do to Bhutan as well on their northern border. So China's strategy is always to contain India. And India also remained in that position for a very long time because of China-Pakistan relationship. So from Gwadar, they will also be building a land route which is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, where they are spending about $60 billion to build that corridor through Western Tibet and East Turkestan and into China. So there are a lot of things that we can discuss. Of course, I've been traveling around. I've been trying to understand and learn as much as possible about international politics, um, and try to convince governments about the need to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict non-violently, that is mutually beneficial, and there will be a negotiated solution which would be lasting. Because violence cannot beget violence begets more violence. Violence will never be a solution. Uh, if you watch at what is happening in Gaza, Israel, or Ukraine, Russia, whether you are resolving one problem now or you are creating more problem for future, nobody knows for sure. And internationally also, uh, some people tell me that, oh, the dragon is biting at us, dragon meaning China. So I tell them, dragon at one time was very weak. Who made the dragon so strong to be able to bite at you? It's United States. You don't have to read too many books, just read one book, Kissinger on China, and you will understand when China was about to fall, how United States tilted it from all sides to make it stronger. And then you look at the investment from European Union to China. You look at the investment from Japan and Taiwan in China. All these countries are responsible for making what China is today. But now, knowing that the dragon is biting at you, if you still keep feeding the dragon, then whose fault is it? That's what I keep telling the international community. Of course, we don't appreciate violence. We don't support violence. We always seek a non-violent solution based on Buddha's thinkings. So, to the Western countries, I always say that if there has to be a non-violent move, then give less business to China. Just about a week ago, China came out with its export reports, and they are talking about $1 trillion worth of exports to other countries. Surplus. It's not just the total worth of exports, it's a surplus exports to all these countries. With the United States, despite all the rhetoric, China has about surplus of about 300 to $350 billion. With the EU, China has surplus of about $400 billion because EU exports only 200 billion and imports 600 billion. And with the global South countries, there is a deficit of about $384 billion with China. So with all these $1 trillion of foreign exchange reserve, then China splurges on the Belt and Road initiatives, on space technology, on robotics, on quantum computing, on dual use technology, supplying those to Russia. And I keep telling the Europeans that if you buy more goods from Russia, you are indirectly helping sustain the war in Ukraine. Because you give more business to China. China buys all this oil from Russia, and then Russia keeps sustaining the war in Ukraine, and they also use all the dual-use technologies. So all these things, the global political situation is very dynamic today as we speak. There are about 55 violent conflicts going on around this world. So the message of nonviolence is also very important. So this afternoon we will speak a little bit about the geostrategic importance of Tibet and the environmental importance of Tibet and the importance of Tibetan Buddhist culture, not only for Tibetans, but for the whole region and for the whole world. So with these brief overviews, I'll stop here, and I'm very thankful to the Honorable Chief Minister for all his support throughout these years. And we know that His Holiness has been going around the world with his folded hands over so many decades, and he kept the issue of the issue of Tibet alive. And I say I'm an ordinary person. I think last year or a year ago, before, you had Professor Samdong Rinpoche to speak about secularism and governance here in Arunachal Pradesh. And Rinpoche remains my guru. I always tell him I did not take classes from you, but I learned by watching Rinpoche how he functioned. So for us also, we have a lot of difficulties in terms of resources, both human and financial. So we have a lot of friends from different countries, particularly the government of India and the people of India, who have been very supportive, without whom we don't exist. If the government of India doesn't want us to exist, we don't exist. So it's all because of the benevolence of government of India that we are here, and it's because of the state governments where Tibetans reside that we are here. And our people are also making a lot of effort to make a good living. Our people do business in more than 250 Indian towns and cities, because the 1 acre of land that is provided for one person now has expanded to larger families. It's not enough for survival. So we go to Indian towns and cities to do winter business to make our ends meet. And we are spending about 35 to $40 million in a year annually, and part of that comes from the Indian government, part of that comes from the US government, and only 9% contribution comes from the Tibetans. So 91% we are still begging. So whenever we go around the world, we go with two outstretched hands, one for political support and one for financial support. And the Honorable Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, I know your state is also dependent on the central government for a lot of things, but despite all that, you have taken care of our people here. We remain ever grateful to you. And till we return back to Tibet, we will need this support. And I assure you that we will never ever lose hope. We are preparing for the long haul. So one of my responsibilities is to reach out to younger Tibetans as much as possible. And I've also reached out to as many universities. In London, in England alone, I've spoken at Oxford, Aberdeen, Westminster, Warwick universities, and we will be covering more universities during this year when our election happens. So thank you very much again for all your help, support, and benevolence and hospitality in keeping our issue alive and keeping our people alive in the worst of our time. So we hope that there will be better times ahead where we can live as neighbors in future and help each other. Thank you.